Hello and welcome to the Devoted Outdoorsman's podcast. Hey guys, I hope you guys had a great week and you're ready for another podcast. I don't know about you guys, but this week dragged so long, man. I was like Monday, Tuesday, it was pretty alright, and then like Thursday took forever, and today, Friday, it was ridiculous. It was like it was a never-ending day. So needless to say, I'm ready for the weekend. I'm ready for my 2 days off. Well, I mean, as off as I can get being married with 2 kids and working a full-time job. We had a pretty active week on the Facebook page, man. I got like 300 likes this week. Thank you guys. Thank you for going and liking my page. I really appreciate that, and let's keep it up. Share the page, share the podcast, and share the YouTube channel with all your friends. That's the Devoted Outdoorsman on Facebook and on YouTube. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the podcast we're having today. I was really excited with the guest that we were having. His name is Adam Keith from the Land and Legacy podcast. He also has a management consulting company. I believe that's how you would put it. Adam, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But he also works for Mossy Oak Properties, and he's a real estate agent there. So if you guys are looking to buy some land, hit up Adam. He's a super cool guy, and he's really down to earth, and I'm sure he'd be more than welcome to help anyone out with any of their questions when it comes to buying property or whatever your questions could be about management or whatnot. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and start this podcast off with a little bit of how Adam got hooked on the outdoors. We talk about feral hogs, deer management, property management, and we kind of just BS about a few things. So we're going to go ahead and just get this podcast started here. I think I rambled on enough. I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Adam, here you go, man.
Sounds good. So, for me, I look back because it was a very unorthodox way of really getting hooked up on the outdoors. And frankly, at a young age, I think like a lot of kids, I didn't have an attention span. My wife would argue that I still don't. But I was kind of just, I enjoyed being out there, but it wasn't so much the hunt that intrigued me. It was just the nature side of it. So I didn't start out. My dad wasn't a bow hunter. He's a diehard still to this day turkey hunter. But he was more of a quail upland type hunter also. And that's what my grandpa was. And so for me, what really hooked me was not deer, not turkey, not any kind of big game. It was small game. So we went quail hunting, and as a kid, I didn't even carry a gun. More rocks and sticks, and I threw them in the creek, and I just walked around and watched the dog work. And then it led into carrying a 410 and carrying a 20 gauge. And then that led more into rabbit and squirrels and turkey. And that's really what got me hooked, was the small game side of it. I don't have any kids right now, but if I'm blessed with kids one day, I will probably do the same thing with them. I'll try to introduce them to the more interactive, more, the hunting that you can enjoy, walk around, you not get as cold, you can talk, you can laugh. 'Cause, deer hunting for me is sometimes even, I don't know how many hours or days we spend in a tree stand, but there's some days where you're just like, man, this is boring. It's like, I'm burned out. I need a break. And so as a kid, I didn't really enjoy deer hunting a whole lot because it was sit there, freeze, and can't talk. And it was like, these are things that I don't enjoy. And so as I got older and the challenge, okay, squirrel hunting's fun, but I'd like a little bit more of a challenge. That's when I evolved into really liking deer hunting more and more. And now I love it, but it was definitely the small game that got me started in the outdoors.
And I think that's how a lot of people end up getting hooked on the outdoors or falling in love with just being outside and in the woods, or even just fishing or whatever it is just being out there with your family and seeing how much fun everyone's having, and, just enjoying the wind or the way that birds fly or whatever it is. I think that has a lot to do with it. And, I have 2 kids, and I've kind of tried to introduce my son into hunting when he was about 3 or 4. And, at first it was very irritating. I was like, man, why isn't he, why isn't it clicking with him? But then as, I kind of matured and he matured, I started to realize, when I was a kid, I didn't like it that much either. You really got to think about things like that when you're introducing kids into the outdoors. So what's it like being a wildlife consultant, right? That's what your job title is?
That's what my job title is for sure. I do that and real estate. So I kind of just, anything land, I'm neck deep in it. I'm trying to, so I've been consulting for a long time. Land and Legacy was created, about a year ago, and we travel across the country. This past 2017, we were in Delaware all the way to Texas and anywhere in between. So we travel a lot, and it's basically people hire us, and in most cases, they're whitetail deer enthusiasts. Some people have been more into, some of them have been multi-use properties, so they like hunting, but they also want to find a way to make it work with cattle. And so we just help landowners try to make their land more productive, whatever that may be. They want better yields from their crops, but also have hunting, or they want to have more acres for their cattle, but they also enjoy the hunting, or they're strictly devoted to hunting. We're there to help them reach their goals.
So you said you spent some time in Texas. There's a large feral hog problem down there. What are some of the kind of things you guys do, how you guys deal with that, or suggestions you give for people?
Well, thankfully, there's been some new stuff involved with the feral hogs. But for us, thankfully, we haven't had to deal with them a whole lot. One of the properties we were on in Texas had a few, but anytime a hog shows up, they contact the State Department and get one of the boar busters. Basically, when I actually spent some time working for the Missouri Department of Conservation and dealing with the feral hog problem. And in those days, we were using traps that were basically like a guillotine door, but it was a big circle pin. So they knew of the pin, and then you trap one sounder out of it, and it was just like, okay, that's it. That's all of it. The rest of them are educated. We're going to have to find another way to do this. But with the new techniques of the drop-down cages, that's been a very innovative way to help knock down the population. And I think the first year that Missouri Department of Conservation started using those traps, that was their best year ever of trapping hogs. And then 2017 rolled around, and I think they broke that again. So it's been that's been one of the biggest things that has changed controlling the feral hog problem on a lot of the properties we visit.
Yeah, and it's a growing problem here in Oklahoma as well. I live here in the northeastern part of the state, and I hunt a lot of state-owned property or state-leased property, and a lot of them are being overran with hogs, man. It's actually becoming kind of ridiculous. It's an epidemic that people, are kind of overlooking, and I think a lot of people are bringing them into new areas, and it's causing them to spread very fast. But that's kind of off topic. But let's get back on.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and I'll tie this back to habitat here for you, so we can get back to that. But when you talk about the epidemic, and when I think of hogs in Oklahoma, the common phrase that I always hear is, it's not, something like, it's not how many you have, but it's when you're going to have them, basically. I totally messed that up, but that's kind of the phrase is, it's not if, but it's when. And there's two other problems, or that's one of the big problems. The other big problem in Oklahoma is eastern red cedar. And it's kind of one of those things that I think that this is what really makes our Land and Legacy consulting business a lot different than some of the others is we're not necessarily preaching the food plots and switchgrass screens and do ABC to get XYZ or do ABC to get giant deer. I'm kind of a natural history buff, so I read all kinds of journals of what really was going on pre-settlement and kind of try to recreate that on the properties we go to in the best of our abilities. And so a lot of times there's stuff going on right in front of our eyes, but we just aren't aware of it. Eastern red cedar is one of those things. Feral hog is another. some people look at them as being great and thinking, oh, it's a lot of fun to hunt hogs, and that's actually what has been the reason for the spread of them in a lot of cases is people, they enjoy the hunt of the hogs, so they trap some and bring them to their property and dump them out. But it's happening right in front of our eyes, but we're not aware of it. And so we're trying to really help people understand, hey, this species, although it may seem great, it's going to be detrimental to the native habitat that we have. So eastern red cedar is one of those that some guys say they're fantastic thermal cover, but in reality, there was white-tailed deer doing a fine job of surviving pre-settlement, and there wasn't hardly any cedar trees around other than in some rough areas that the fire couldn't reach. So they were making it in the cold winters, even without the thermal cover, I say that air quotes, of the eastern red cedar. So there's better ways.
Absolutely, I agree with that. The cedar trees, man, they're ridiculous. They're just as bad as the hogs when it comes to spreading. I agree. You have one, and then the next year you have 10 of them.
And yes, for sure. And it could all be solved if we try to replicate nature. So we talk so much in our consulting business about working with Mother Nature, not against her. And, naturally speaking, the way the land was managed, either by Native Americans or through lightning strikes, but prescribed fire was a huge part of the ecosystem and really helped it. And we've removed that through various things. Smokey the Bear campaign was a big one, but we've removed fire, and so now we have these species that can flourish, and the eastern red cedar is like the number one thing. And just with reintroducing fire, we could solve a lot of our problems.
And the prescribed fire is also good for your deer as well. It helps with the ticks, and it gives them a little bit of better food source to eat, the forbs and everything. You probably know more about that than I do, but to get back on,
it's great.
A deer.
We know that.
Yeah, we do know that prescribed fire is great. To get kind of back on a deer talk here. Have you heard anything about the large number of whitetail that were harvested in Oklahoma this year? The large whitetail that were harvested. We had, I think it's been 29 over 200 inches that have been measured this year in Oklahoma. Do you have any input on what you think might leading into that, or?
I think I'm trying to remember. I think it was 3 years ago. The QDMA puts out their annual whitetail report. And based on the State Department's research and the amount of deer harvest, so they look at, okay, yearling buck, 2-year-old, 3-year-old. Oklahoma was the number one state for age class harvesting. So it seemed that the people in Oklahoma were shooting less 1.5 and 2.5-year-olds and shooting more 3.5-year-old and older age class bucks. Well, you fast forward 3 years or 2 years, I can't remember when it was, and now you've got 3 years of that same routine where people are passing young bucks and letting bucks get old. And combine that with your habitat of basically kind of grassland, I am not at all shocked that that's happening in Oklahoma. And in fact, I think Oklahoma is one of the biggest underrated states. Nobody talks about it. It's Iowa, Kansas, Illinois, even northern Missouri, but it's like nobody talks about Oklahoma. So between you and me and everybody else that hears this, I say that jokingly, is if I'm looking to buy property down the road, I probably am considering Oklahoma over a lot of the other states.
It's kind of funny that you say that it kind of just goes under the radar. I just did a podcast with George Moore. He's a Pope and Young Boone and Crockett measurer here in Oklahoma, and he's one of the guys that measured the 28 of those deer, or 29 of those deer. And I was talking to him the other day, and we made a podcast, and the name of it, I'm calling it the Sleeper State. So it's kind of it's kind of funny that you brought that up.
Oh, it totally is, and I think another big reason why it's not just, for example, when you talk about the northern bobwhite quail numbers going down, and I'll tie this in, I promise you. When you talk about the numbers going down, people say it's because of predators. Oh, okay. Well, Yeah, sure, predators have an impact on it, but don't you think it's probably more the habitat is lacking? So if they had better habitat, the predators wouldn't be able to eat as many of the quail. So it's basically the root of that is loss of habitat, not a population hike in predators. Same thing is true with bigger deer in Oklahoma. It's not the fact people are doing that. The part of that is the fact that there's more education. So more people are aware that the less young bucks you shoot, the more older age bucks you'll get to shoot. So I think Oklahoma's done a great job of educating hunters and new hunters about the potential of harvesting bigger deer down the road if they let those young deer walk.
I've noticed that on social media over the past few years, that I've noticed less and less, it seems like, immature bucks that have been harvested. And, I didn't know about that QDMA, thing you were talking about, but that makes perfect sense. I feel like a lot of people are kind of getting on the management, or just waiting for a more mature animal to come out. And I think that has a lot to do with the deer that were harvested. So, did you end up harvesting deer this year?
I harvested several does, and I actually missed a 160 class buck out in Kansas. Sorry, I'm thinking about Oklahoma now, but missed a really nice buck in Kansas, mid-November. That was kind of the highlight of my year, was seeing that arrow hit the limb, and it was like, wow, that is the best deer I've ever shot at, and I caught a limb. I guess that's just the way it goes.
Now, sometimes that's just the way it happens, and I'm sure you replayed that in your mind over and over again, trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
So, to bring it back kind of to a land type conversation here, if someone was to buy, let's say a new property owner, and they bought some land here, let's say in northeastern Oklahoma, because it's kind of a same topography and everything of what you're used to in the Ozarks, what would you say would be, one of the first things that they should do, that, go in for, is they should have a land specialist or someone like you come in and look at the land? Or
I encourage everybody to try and learn the landscape on their own. But first and foremost is understanding what you are wanting out of the property. So when I buy a farm, let's say it's 40 acres, first I need to realize the potential of that farm, to where basically it's going to allow you to enjoy the farm more, or you're going to have more heartbreak. So if I bought 40 acres, I shouldn't realistically say, I want to kill a 200-inch deer here every year. Because if that's my goals, I'm not going to ever be happy. And so understand what your goals are, and then what do you need to do to reach those goals? So if, regardless of what the farm looks like, you're going to either need to improve the habitat or keep the habitat at peak performance. So you need to understand what that habitat is, and wherever it may be, it could be timber or grassland, understand that and say, okay, how can I make this peak performance? So a lot of times, if it's timber in northeast Oklahoma, you need to say, okay, is there any value to this timber? Because I'm guessing that whatever piece of land, it's going to make up the majority of the acreage. So, okay, how can I improve this timber? There's a little bit of value here. I'm going to go ahead and have a logger come in, harvest those logs, and I'm going to take that money and put it into either my pocket or improving the rest of the acreage, maybe making some food plots. And that's just kind of the first steps for us, is how can I make the biggest impact? First, I want to know my goals, and then how can I make the biggest improvement in the shortest amount of time?
So now that it's kind of, deer season's kind of over, people are starting to shed hunt and everything, but what are some property, improvements that you could be doing at this time of year that are pretty easy, that you don't have to have a lot of equipment or machinery to do? Yeah.
Well, I think 2 podcasts ago we did maybe just one right now. We did habitat improvement on a shoestring budget, basically. One of the biggest things, one of my favorite things to do this time of year, because we're in winter and we're going, okay, my deer are hungry. And in our case, where we're at, they're really hungry this year because we had a horrible drought in the fall. We didn't have any food plots come up. So now we're looking, and you're seeing deer out in the middle of pastures in the middle of the day where you typically wouldn't see them. So we know our deer are hungry. How can I improve it? Well, one of the biggest diets of white-tailed deer this time of year is woody browse. So if you look at a lot of the trees in your timber, you're going to see little buds or young little ends of the twigs that are deer are still going to eat. So one thing that we can do to provide food but also provide cover in very short time is fire up the chainsaw and go drop some trees. And when we talk about dropping trees, it's finding those species that aren't going to provide any income down the road. So dogwoods, sassafras, hickories, things like that are, you can just cut them, and you keep doing that over, let's say you're going out on Saturdays and you're doing that. You do that a couple Saturdays in a row, deer are going to start associating the running of the chainsaw with food. So it's a point where as soon as you cut them, you can get out of there, and most likely they're going to be in there that night eating on those buds of those trees.
Well, now that you said that you recently had a podcast about that, I will put that link in the description so people can check that out.
There you go. There's a lot of things you can do. That's my favorite. It's so easy. It's just a chainsaw. Most people have a chainsaw, or they can borrow a chainsaw. One big thing that happens a lot, actually, right before you and I hooked up and started doing this podcast, I was reading an article QDMA had shared about people up in New Hampshire, I think they were, and they were dumping out whole corn. And they did it and it ended up killing the deer because the deer didn't have enough bacteria built up in their gut with that new food source, and so they basically they died due to kindness of the landowner. So that's something that people look at as an immediate fix. Okay, I'm going to go dump some whole corn out on the ground, but there's other practices that are much more beneficial long term that I would rather do.
That's pretty crazy. So in that landowner's mind, or that lessee's mind, he was just thinking, oh, I'm going to put this out here. The deer are going to love it, and, it's going to help them out, not knowing that it was going to end up harming them. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Another big thing that we do this time of year is put in fire lines. And if it gets dry enough, who knows? We could go ahead and start burning in January, and you get some warm days, you'll start getting a little bit of growth back. But putting in fire lines and getting ready for prescribed fire season in February, March, April is another big thing to do this time of the year.
So would you say that February, March, and April are the best times of year to do a prescribed burn?
Depending on your goals. Once again, it seems like every question is a complex answer, but if you're wanting to, so you think about winter burns or spring burns, basically that February, March, April, you're helping stimulate grasses. You start burning in July, August, September, you're going to try and stimulate forbs, broadleaf type plants. So the thing about it is in our country where we're at, and probably yours, where you get into timber, you get a little bit of terrain change, you can't hardly burn closed canopy forests during the growing season. You need to do spring burns. So that's that February, March, April time period.
And that's because of the sun getting down to the floor, correct?
Exactly.
If you want to, you can go ahead and plug your podcast, and you said you're doing real estate for
Mossy Oak.
So if you want to go ahead and plug that, you're good to go, man.
Okay, sounds good. So Land and Legacy podcast, we do a weekly podcast, a little over an hour each week. And instead of being gear reviews and interviewing a bunch of other deer hunters, we're trying to do something that basically is a niche. I think we're the only one devoted to it, but we talk every week for an hour on all things land and habitat management. So it could be like last week was the things you can do on very little budget to improve your land. Or this week was all on doe management and kind of what your goal should be with doe management, harvesting more does, what not to harvest, how to look at the habitat and say we need to harvest more. So it's a podcast devoted to all things land management. So We cover that every week, and it's just basically Matt, Di, and I, my partner, talking about the things we love. So it's a lot of fun. We do it on the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, and hopefully all your listeners will check it out.
I hope so, man. You guys run an awesome podcast over there, along with all the other podcasts that are part of the Sportsman's Nation thing that's going on.
So, from feral hogs to giant whitetail to red cedars, we had a pretty cool podcast, I think. I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I had a great time talking with Adam. I was really excited to have him on the podcast. I know a lot of people were interested and pretty excited to listen to this podcast, so I hope you guys like what we talked about. If you guys like to hear about the deer management stuff and you guys want to hear more, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, Adam has a pretty cool podcast called Land and Legacy over on the Sportsman's Nation Network, and you guys should go check it out, man. They talk a lot about deer management and habitat management, and they're just pretty cool guys, so you guys should check that out for sure. And I will definitely leave a link in my show notes so you guys can check out that podcast that Adam was talking about with the land management on a shoestring budget. Please check out the YouTube and the Facebook page, The Devoted Outdoorsman. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the podcast. I had an awesome time with Adam, and till next time, The Devoted Outdoorsman logging out.